The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, thinking they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Really, JJ Reddick? Dropping a couple of F-bombs in your introductory news conference? Classy. Yeah, really classy on your part. I'll have some reaction to that coming up. I'll play what he had to say yesterday as he was introduced as the latest Lakers coach. We'll see how long he lasts. Boy, what a final last night in hockey. A seventh game that you root for, and sometimes these 7-game series wind up with a dud final. Not last night, as the Florida Panthers won their first Stanley Cup, and a very compelling interview done by Scott Van Pelt with Paul Maurice, the coach of the Panthers. We'll get to that shortly. Plus, I think a very comforting interview that was done with the quarterback's coach for Jayden Daniels, the personal coach. He's been working with him since he was 10 years old. And for those of us who have, I guess, even slight fears that this will wind up being RG3, the sequel, what I heard from Ryan Porter, I think, curbs those fears. We'll get to that shortly. But the Florida Panthers did it. Boy, oh boy, it looked like we're going to see an historic collapse. They go up 3-0. They lose a couple of lopsided games. And then all of a sudden it's 3-3. They go back to Florida tomorrow night. Clearly Edmonton has the momentum. But the Panthers did what they have done all year. They shut down the offense of the opponent last night, holding Edmonton to 1 goal, and they close it out 2-1. And this is a team that, was nowhere for a long time, from 1996 to 2022. So that's the time that Paul Maurice became the coach, 2022. They had the 25th best regular season record in points percentage. Worst playoff record, 13-29. They didn't win a series during that entire time. And they had a few highlights. Pavel Bure's back-to-back goal-scoring titles, Roberto Luongo's Hall of Fame goaltending career, but a lot of busts along the way, and really being irrelevant. They're in Fort Lauderdale. They're not even in Miami, which is not a good sports town. There's a lot of teams there, but they don't draw very well. Even the Dolphins have trouble selling out. They're in Fort Lauderdale, and they are nowheresville. They, at one point, and this is recent, rather recently, in the last 15 years, they were selling season tickets for $6 a ticket with free parking and a jersey. They'd even throw in a jersey. They just wanted people in the building. Now, they weren't, front row seats, but still, $7 to get in the building on season tickets? It was crazy. So now they're at the top of the heap. They're Stanley Cup champions. And their coach, Paul Maurice, who took over just a couple of years ago, this was his 209th game coaching the team, talked to Scott Van Pelt last night after he hoisted the cup.
As best as you can, how do you make this moment make sense? How do you articulate the feelings within?
Not well. I'm usually not lost for words. But there's this incredible sense of connection to all the people, even though they're not here, my mom and dad, my brothers, the whole family that you need to support you over time. And I kind of begged them to support me for 30 years before we could share some joy with them. And that's what this whole thing feels like at this point, right? Just that connection. Every player that comes over, you have this incredible connection with, and the coaches that you share those moments with. But you're right, like the wives and the children and the people that get moved from town to town so you can follow this silly dream and chase that damn trophy. And it's nice to be able to catch up to it every once in a while.
The list of things I appreciate, Paul, about you, it's lengthy, but just the way you articulate things, sometimes profane, that's fine, I'm the same, but always thoughtful, always measured. And I felt that throughout this Cup final, as it went from 3-0 to 3-1 to 3-2 to 3-3, I felt like you always projected calm. But those are long flights back and forth, and that's a really talented club you're trying to beat. When your mind wanders and you're trying to figure out how do I put the boys in the right frame of mind for tonight, where does the mind go with there's so much time to think about what's happening?
What you want and somebody had asked me, do you enjoy the game? Like, we lost game 5, and I love that game because we played great. It is about the result. Obviously, you got to win a Stanley Cup, but what you want is for your team to look a certain way. We have an identity, a thing that we all bond together around. So you get into that game tonight and you're playing the first period, you're going, okay, it's done. Not that we're going to win, but this is as good as we can compete. We're playing as well as we possibly can. So that's where the mind goes. How do I get them back to that place that they can play with enough freedom so we have structure and we have discipline and all that? But what we needed to, and what we were different about us tonight, is that we played with some freedom, that we made plays, that we didn't play the game not to make the mistakes and certainly not to lose, but we tried to win the game.
You're the best club in the sport in the third period all season long, and you're carrying a 2-1 lead into the last 20 minutes, and it's 20 minutes to be a forever team, right? Is there something that needs to be said, or at that point is it just that your hands are off the wheel and you let it go?
Yeah, the hands came off the wheel about February, so that was done. And we were careening out of control at the time, but
bounding into the guardrails.
So we get into about exactly. So there's 6 minutes left to go in the second period. Sam Ryan had scored that goal, and everybody is standing on the bench, starting to lose their minds. Right?
Yep.
And boys, we cannot stand for a period and a half freaking out every time somebody touches the puck. So just tried to go in there, get them to breathe a little bit. We know what we do. And then we invented a new idea. We just iced the puck 75 times in the third period, so that was it.
Well, brilliant strategy. Listen, I don't know the first thing about coaching your sport, Paul, but look, they got 97, they got 28, they got Hyman, they got a boatload of guys that can put the puck in the net. As best you can, I can't imagine how long it takes for those 20 minutes to exhaust themselves. How are you processing those moments?
We talk about this. We talk about this from training camp on. When there's 8 minutes left to go in the third period in the deciding game, if we've got this right, we're saying, I hope the clock slows down, not speeds up.
What do you mean by that?
To be present, to be in the moment. I don't want that thing to go. I don't want the game to end like that. I'm not wishing for this thing to be over so we can call ourselves Stanley Cup champions. I want to live the moment that we're in. I'm never, very probably ever getting a Game 7 Stanley Cup final ever in my life again. I don't want it to speed up. I want it to slow down.
Love it. Be present. Be where your feet are, right? That's what they say. And it goes the way you want it to, Paul, so you don't have to spend the rest of your life wondering what if. So I'm not going to ask you what if. I'm going to ask you instead, now what? Now you're a Stanley Cup champion. Your name's on that thing forever and ever. No matter what happens from right now until the end of time, you're on the cup. How's that change your life?
I hope it doesn't. I hope I'm learning to live my life well enough that the trophy doesn't define how I treat the people around me. Mm-hmm. But I'm also going to skate the hell out of these guys in training camp because I got carte blanche now. I can do whatever the hell I want.
You sure can. And as a final
brutal camp coming up, boys. Yeah.
Giddy up. As just a final thought, Paul, we showed that moment where you got your hands on it, and I don't think we can quote you, and that's fine. But the feeling that goes through, right? You wait your whole life, and then it's in your midst, and then what? You want to be present in that second right there. What's that? What's that all?
The first part of that, well, I said some unkind things to the Stanley Cup because I had to chase it for so long. And then I closed my eyes and I wanted to feel it. I wasn't going to remember a lot of things, but I'll never forget the weight of it and how it felt. And then I opened my eyes and all the players were in front of me smiling. And that's when the profanity came out. Because that line I use in that room all the time.
Yeah, and he said, I never hugged so many sweaty men in my life. That's Paul Maurice, the Stanley Cup winning coach of the Florida Panthers, who finally get one. I just saw yesterday that the Capitals going to have a logo to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the team. You know, their inaugural season, 74-75. And I think how far they came in winning their cup 6 years ago. Florida, as I mentioned, you know, a Nowheresville team for like 25 years. One of the worst win percentages in the league, and now they have their cup. The Capitals, boy, they really came from far back. That first season, they won 8 games, only one of them on the road. And now they're an organization that's in the mix every year, and it's nice to see. And they're going to do this with a special patch that's going to be part of the ice, and also wear it on their jerseys. They're going to have a multiple eras night to highlight the different periods of the franchise history. But time moves on, and we finish with hockey season on the 24th of June, and Friday's the draft. We roll right into that. The draft starts Friday in Las Vegas. Let me shift to JJ Reddick. JJ Reddick, I didn't have any huge thoughts either way on him becoming the coach of the Lakers. He's not the first guy to coach an NBA team with no experience, and Bill Russell was a player coach with the Celtics. Lenny Wilkins was a player coach, I believe, with Portland before Bill Walton got there. Doc Rivers never coached anywhere before he got his coaching job. These things happen in the NBA. But, my God, have some perspective on this. Now, he does, make a few jokes about it at the news conference yesterday. He said, I never coached in the NBA before. I don't know if you guys had heard that. Well, that was kind of like, a little sensitive. But he did go on to say that, he hadn't won anything before as a coach. He says, I'm a 2-time 55 Swiss League champion in the 3rd and 4th grade division. And, he's comparing the circumstances with Danny Hurley, who is being courted after JJ's name had already come up for the job. So there was a little bit of humility in that. But then this came up in the news conference, and you can look at this as an age thing, and you could say, you're an old man, Andy, get over this. This is the way things are these days. But this was a reasonable question that was asked at the news conference, which deserved a reasonable answer, which he started to give, and then he went to the JJ Punk route. This was, again, JJ Reddick at his introductory news conference yesterday after being named coach of the Lakers.
What misconceptions or concerns about you that you've heard in the last few weeks are you the most looking forward to dispelling when you're the coach?
It's a valid question, and I've certainly heard everything. It's been a really interesting 6 weeks or so, just in terms of being part of the engagement farming industry. It's been really interesting. However, I don't really have a great answer for your question, because I really don't give a fuck. Honestly, I want to coach the Lakers. I want to coach the team. I don't want to dispel anything. I don't. I want to become a great coach in the NBA, and I want to win championships, and I want my players to maximize their careers. That's all I fucking care about.
Yeah, 2 F-bombs there in a 10, 15-second soundbite. And, really, you're the CEO, essentially, of the team. Can you imagine Tim Cook getting up at an Apple news conference to introduce a new product, and somebody says, people say you're no Steve Jobs. And, he says something along the lines of, well, I don't give an F about that. How do you think that goes over? You got, a paying customer base here that pays to see Laker games and watches them on TV and buys their products. And that's how you behave, really? And he referenced his time playing under Mike Krzyzewski. You think Mike Krzyzewski would have dropped an F-bomb at his opening Duke news conference? And if he did, how long he would have lasted on the job? Because they're about ready to run him out of town anyway, because he got off to a slow start. He didn't start winning until his 3rd or 4th year on the job. He didn't make his Final Four until he'd been there, I think, 5 or 6 years. So, come on. Really, JJ? Is that the way you want to go about it? Peter Vesey, and you could say, okay, Peter Vesey's a fossil. He's an old man. He's covered the league about as much as anybody. Hasn't been on television 15, 20 years, but continued to write about the NBA in the New York Post. Probably knows more people associated with the league. He's acerbic, and he got criticized for things that he said in print and on and off the air. But I'm with him on this. These are a couple of tweets that Vesey sent out after the news conference. He says, He says, I haven't had the enjoyment of openly detesting an active player or coach since I was a Brooklyn Dodgers worshiper, to the degree I'm going to root against JJ Reddick. Yeah, he makes up names for people, kind of like the former president. Has called him JJ Ridiculous. And we'd say as kids, if conceit were consumption, he'd be consumed, not soon enough. And he says, I hope the Lakers lose every game, exhibition, and shoot around, and Ridiculous continues to make a fool of himself during every interview, podcast, and press conference. Yeah, I mean, this is just no way to go about it, in my mind. And look, I was loud wrong about Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell, when he was introduced as head coach of the Lions, he had this thing about biting kneecaps and getting up and biting kneecaps again, and how they weren't going to quit. And I said, this guy's a lunkhead. He's going to last a year. Well, 3 years later, they're in the mix to make the Super Bowl this year. So I was loud wrong about him. And I may be loud wrong about JJ Reddick. But just wait. Just wait until LeBron starts dictating minutes for his kid, who they may draft in the second round on Friday night. Yeah, just wait until LeBron tells JJ what the score is. They may have become friends doing a podcast, and JJ says he's not going to do a podcast anymore. But this will fail spectacularly. And would it be a complete shock to me if JJ doesn't last the season? No, it wouldn't. It's happening now in the NFL. We've seen it a couple of times where coaches don't make it through a season. Coaches come and go in the NBA, and the Lakers have churned through many of them in the last 15 years. And while LeBron may or may not, and Brian Windhorst says he doesn't, while LeBron may or may not choose the coach, he coaches the team. Let's face it. He's the general manager of the team. He's the coach of the team. And JJ Reddick may understand how that relationship works. And he realizes that, okay, LeBron may play 2 more years, maybe 3, but this is not going to work. That's not how you conduct yourself in an opening news conference where you're dropping F-bombs like that. Of course, people are going to ask questions like that, and you had to anticipate a question like that. But to handle it like that, this is a product that's supposed to be consumed by families. Do you want a guy watching this news conference with his 11-year-old kid, and the kid thinks it's okay that the head coach of his favorite team drops F-bombs at news conferences? And this isn't, Bobby Knight upset about some loss or something. This is the insensitivity of a guy who doesn't have a complete understanding of what it means to be a head coach of a major professional team, and probably the most high-profile team in the NBA, maybe even more so than the Celtics, who just passed them in championships because of where they are, because of in Los Angeles, because of the attention on the team. And, I just looked at that yesterday and went, oh, come on, really? You're going to go that route on the day you're celebrating your 40th birthday? Come at me. I'm 40. I'm a man. Well, you're not a man. You're a punk when you do that. And don't compare your experience under Mike Krzyzewski. Krzyzewski wouldn't have done that. He would not have done that at all. And I just think we're going to look back on this maybe even less than a year from now and go, well, you could kind of see it coming when this happened. You could kind of see what was coming down the pipe when JJ Reddick decided it was okay to drop F-bombs at a news conference. Really? Really, JJ? Is that the way you're going to do it? Good luck to you. Coming up, we'll got something just I saw from Pro Football Talk that I want to get to about the Commanders team president. Interesting news on that. Plus, maybe some comforting thoughts on the development of Jayden Daniels. We'll get to that more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. Certainly in my case, I don't know about yours, but in my case, I don't need another reason to feel old. You ready for this? Purple Rain came out 40 years ago today. And I remember thinking, yeah, that's kind of for the younger kids. 40 years ago. That's become one of the most successful albums of all time, an iconic album with iconic songs. And I think of all the great halftime shows that have been done in the NFL over the last 30 years, that's got to be the best. The one he did in the rain in Miami, the late, great Prince, and his album, Purple Rain, made his debut 40 years ago today. How about that? A lot of NFL stuff to get to, and this I saw on Twitter in the last few minutes or so. Pro Football Talk is reporting this, that, and this was announced yesterday, the Packers are going to have a new team president. Mark Murphy, who played his career with the Redskins, won a Super Bowl with them after the 82 season, went on to become an athletic director at Northwestern, worked for the Players Association, an attorney, a really accomplished guy. And the Packers are a public organization. They don't have a single owner. And they have a policy that that you have to retire at the age of 70. So next year, Mark Murphy turns 70. He will retire, and this is no pun intended, but the new president is named Ed Policy, and he'll become the chairman of the team next year. But according to Jonathan Jones of CBS Sports, Jason Wright was a finalist for the job. He's been here since the 2020 season. He came in as Dan Snyder was trying to save himself. And not that Jason Wright wasn't qualified to become team president, but the fact that he was a minority, Snyder, I thought, felt it was going to be helpful for him in trying to fend off the reporting that was being done by the Washington Post, reporting that ultimately sunk him and ultimately forced him, thank God, to sell the team and walk away with a $60 million fine, paying off his toxic culture that he created in the organization. Now, Jason Wright, you know, he was a part of a lot of blunders here under Snyder. I mean, there are the things that happened. I looked at them and I said, oh, my God. I mean, how can this happen? Now, the one thing that we liked about Jason Wright when he first took over was, boy, he was a breath of fresh air after Bruce Allen. Bruce Allen almost never talked to the media, and when he did a lot of lying. And Jason Wright was very open and, you know, admitted that they had to make some changes. And enjoyed, it seemed, being interviewed. Maybe enjoyed it a little too much because ever since there's been new ownership, we haven't heard much from him. But he would go on and on about how he had turned things around. Now, he needed to have a little bit more perspective, I thought, in explaining how he was turning things around. When he says publicly, or said publicly, that the season ticket base was up 180%, I don't think he had an understanding of what it was like in this town when season tickets were fought over in wills and divorces. And, you know, you didn't have to be a genius to know that they weren't selling season tickets anymore. But to say it went up 180% and you still saw a half-empty stadium and more than half of those people that were in it were rooting for the other team, you knew that even up 180%, the season ticket base must be pretty low. This is a team that was telling you for years, oh, we got a waiting list of 200,000. No, they didn't. So, and then he lit up Scott Abraham for asking legitimate questions of Carson Wentz, made a personal attack on him, which I thought was wrong. So I looked at a lot of things that he did, and I said, boy, they just blunder after blunder after blunder. Who would possibly want him? The Packers reportedly were interested in him, and I guess good for Jason Wright. I wonder about his long term here. He survived last season. We're, less than a month away from training camp. I assume he's going to stay on the job here. I wonder if he was, pushed into applying for that. I wonder if that's the way that worked, that the owner said, hey, we're not going to keep you around that much longer, so why don't you see if you can get this? I don't know. But, he's got a background in the NFL. He's a former player and now has had experience as the president of a team. Now it's been tumultuous experience given what went on in the last few years of Snyder. But, he on top of everything else where he was continually patting himself on the back, saying what a great job he had done and how teams around the league were calling him to find out how he was doing it so well. After Dan Snyder's out and he danced on his grave, which I thought was a bad look, we can do that, but you worked for him. You defended him all that time. And now you're going to say, oh, it's so great that he's gone and now we can welcome the fan base back? No, that doesn't work that way. But I thought that who would look at him and say, that's a guy we got to have running organization? I don't know. But apparently he was in the mix. I don't think he's going to be here long term. It would seem to me that an experienced owner like Josh Harris, who's owned other teams, would have somebody in mind for that job, and it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody with NFL experience, just somebody experience running a club. I mean, look, they brought in Bob Myers, the former GM of the Golden State Warriors, to help advise them on who to hire as a general manager and who to hire as a coach. So I think that they look outside the box, and just really surprised that he was a finalist for that. Good for Mark Murphy for staying as long as he did with the Packers. I think he's a really good person, and I don't know anything about this guy policy, but we're really surprised that Jason Wright was in the mix for that, if that report is true. I mean, that's just a report at this point, but maybe it is so. Dan Patrick, I guess, is taking this week off. So Ross Tucker is doing the fill-in. Ross Tucker does a podcast. He does a lot of radio and TV. He does the Eagles games on the radio, and he does college football games and so forth. And so he had Greg Cosell on. Greg Cosell, I got to know him 15 years ago. He's a guy who worked for NFL Films. He's been with them for like 40 years and did obviously great work as a producer. He created the Edge matchup show. He's a guy who's a film fanatic, or whatever they call it, tape fanatic now. And he watches it constantly, and he's analyzing players, and he talks to people. So he's done a lot of research on this. Is he always right on guys? No, he's not. But he did say JJ McCarthy, a lot of teams had a third-round grade on him, and he does not expect him to be the starter for the Vikings when they open the season. He has been very complimentary of Jayden Daniels and thinks that Daniels will be very, very good. So he's not looking at personalities. He's just looking at what he sees on tape. And this is what he's explaining here to Ross Tucker, what you look for in a quarterback. When you're analyzing a quarterback as someone who is a film analyst or tape analyst as he is, here's what Greg Cosell is looking for.
When you look at quarterbacks, one thing you have to be very aware of when you talk about their ability to play the position is you have to understand the difference between clean pockets when everything is pristine and a quarterback can drop back and it's clean, there's no one around him, versus what happens when the pocket gets a little muddied and noisy and there's people around him. The really great quarterbacks, those are not factors. They can perform at the same level, Ross, regardless. Lawrence is not quite there yet. Lawrence is a big kid, good arm, not a power arm. Contrary to what people might think, he does not have a power arm. He's got a good arm. One of the issues he has is when he perceives and feels pressure, he starts to play a little faster and he throws the ball not quite as well. So he's got to continue to work on that. People have to remember he's only going into his fourth year. And some might suggest that his first year in the league was kind of a wash because of the whole situation that he played under with Urban Meyer. And it just, it didn't obviously work out. But I think you're dealing with a guy that's really athletic. He actually throws the ball really well on the run, but he doesn't drive the football when there are people around him. And he's going to have to get that figured out. He's a big-bodied guy who tends to be a strider and gets a little elongated in his delivery. So these are just things that he has to continue to work on.
All right, so Greg, but when he came out, whether it was high school or college, I mean, he was talked about since he was maybe 15, 16 years old as being like the next guy. And I guess when I watch him, I don't think he's obviously not Mahomes or Josh Allen. I'm not even sure he's Herbert or Matthew Stafford in terms of physical ability. Because of his early success? Okay, go ahead.
He's not. And by the way, as you know, what he was thought of when he was 15 is not relevant to me, and it's not relevant to NFL coaches. Right now, all Doug Peterson and Press Taylor want to do is get Trevor Lawrence playing at the highest level he can play. Now, he's gifted enough to be a quality NFL quarterback. The question some will have, of course, is can he become one of those top 3 or top 5 guys? That well remains to be seen. And by the way, you don't need a power gun in order to be a top 3 or top 5 quarterback in this league. But there's certainly areas, as I said, where he needs to improve. One thing I do really like about him is he's an aggressive thrower, Ross. When he sees one-on-one outside the numbers, he is delivering the football. And you need to do that in the NFL. It's really hard to be a truly high-level quarterback in this league if you're not going to be aggressive throwing the football.
That's Greg Cosell with Ross Tucker in for Dan Patrick yesterday. This is kind of surprising to me, or maybe it shouldn't be. And this, I guess, addresses landing in the right place, really. And Matt Stafford finally did, going to Los Angeles after all those years in Detroit. But Cosell on Matt Stafford. Listen to this.
Yeah, I think Matthew Stafford's one of the most overlooked quarterbacks in the last decade, if not more. He is a high-level talent. He's played really, really well. He obviously was on a bad team for a year, so he was never talked about. But Stafford is incredibly intelligent, really talented. He's incredibly respected in the league. I mean, he's a really high-level traits quarterback, a high-level mental quarterback. He's just a really, really good quarterback. I mean, you talk to people in the league, and in their mind, he's a top 5 quarterback without question.
How about that? I mean, when you list the top 5, how many people list Matthew Stafford? But this reminds me of what I heard Roger Staubach once say. Staubach, when he was finally through with his naval commitment, was like 1970, 71, one of those years. And he came in the league, and he was a contemporary of Archie Manning. Archie Manning was the second pick of the draft in 1971 after Jim Plunkett. And he went to the New Orleans Saints, which was one of the worst franchises in sports. And they didn't even keep track of sacks until 1982. But it's believed that Archie Manning may have been the most sacked quarterback in history. He had no chance with that team. Staubach winds up with Dallas. And it was because Gil Brandt was a forward thinker. And he thought, let's take a chance. Yeah, he's got to give 5 years to the Navy. But he may still have something left in the tank at 26 or 27. Let's take a shot. They spent a 5th-round pick on him. They had his rights, and Staubach winds up with the Cowboys and has one of the great NFL careers of all time. And Archie Manning was very, very good, but prevented from being great because he went to a terrible team. And Staubach, to his credit, said, if we swap places, the careers might be similar. So when you look at a guy like Stafford, who finally got the opportunity and goes to a team with a good coach and a good team around him in Los Angeles, wins the Super Bowl there. And, they were supposed to have a big drop-off because the Rams had gone for it. They gave up draft picks and, mortgaged the future. They're still a pretty good team. And Stafford, at his age, he's been around a while. I think he came in 2009, so it's a 15-year career. Still playing at a high level. This just popped up on Washington Business Journal. Another step closer to finally scraping off the Dan Snyder from the bottom of our shoes. He's already given away his house in Potomac to the American Cancer Society, taking the tax break on that. I think it's up for sale or has been sold for about $34 million. He's got another house here that's up for sale, and this one is in Fairfax County near Mount Vernon. That house, Riverview, a 16.5-acre estate, up for $60 million. $60 million. That's what they've listed the house for. The Snyders paid $48 million in cash for this house in 2021. Imagine having $48 million in cash. Topping the previous most expensive home sold, which was Jim Kinsey's McLean estate, by $3 million. I actually was in that house once. It was remarkable. Riverview, completed in 2018, offers unspoiled Potomac River frontage, a 16,000-square-foot main home, and a separate carriage home. 15-seat home theater, garages, yada, yada, yada. What are some of the other amenities listed for this house? Anyway, they're looking to sell this house. The other house that they had originally, the one they sold to the American, or gave to the American Cancer Society, they had originally listed it at $49 million. The home was put back on the market for $34.9 million. You'd hate to see the Snyders really do well on this house. They paid $48 million in cash and are selling it for $60 million. But again, one step closer to getting them completely out of town. I guess they're going to live in London and on the yacht. Not that I really care, But, yeah, that closes perhaps another chapter in all of this, that another one of the Dan Snyder homes. I don't think he owned another one. I think there were two of them. The other one has been donated to the American Cancer Society, and this one's on the market for $60 million. Oh, yeah. All right, let's get to more on Jayden Daniels. I was really interested in listening to this yesterday at John Keim's podcast with Ryan Porter, who has been Jayden Daniels' coach, personal coach, quarterback coach, since he was about 10 or 11 years old. So Daniels is 23, more than a decade working with him. Probably knows him very well. Unlikely to say negative things, understand that. But the way he explains the relationship with the father, to me, was very instructive to hear, having watched the incredible meltdown which happened with RG3 and the father's involvement. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
You know, if Georgetown wasn't coming off such 3 miserable seasons and Maryland coming off a very disappointing year where they didn't make the NCAA tournament, this would probably be a much bigger deal. But for those of us who have been around here for a long, long time and remember the back and forth between Lefty Driesell and John Thompson, sadly, both of them gone. And then when Lefty was forced out at Maryland, Gary Williams coming along. And, you know, he said that the game that really was truly important for his program was the one that opened the 93-94 season when they got a chance to play Georgetown at the old Capitol Center and beat Georgetown in overtime. That was really elevating for the program. That was the coming out party for Joe Smith. I think it was Dwayne Simpkins who hit the winning shot, and Keith Booth was a freshman on that team, and that helped to establish Maryland as an excellent program under Gary Williams for many years to come. But, you know, John Thompson was still at Georgetown, and he said that was a one-off. They weren't going to play Maryland every year. The fans wanted it. They wanted it to happen. And finally, it is going to happen. They have announced it's not going to happen this year, unfortunately, that there was a feeling that they could get together, and because Kevin Willard and Ed Cooley were friends from the Big East, and Willard said last year that he had had dinner with Cooley, and they agreed they were going to have a series, and the only reason they didn't start it last year was because they were committed to some tournament early in the year. It wasn't going to work out with their schedule, and we thought it could happen this year. It's not going to happen this year, but finally, they got it worked out. So in the fall of 2025, we're going to have to wait over a year for this, but the first game will be played at the Xfinity Center, then they'll play at Capital One Arena, then they'll play again at the Terps home court at Xfinity Center, and then the contract goes through the 28-29 season. So that's good. That's something that should happen every year, and I really wouldn't have a problem, personally, if they played it every year at Capital One. I know it's Georgetown's home court, and that's probably going to be a sticking point for Maryland, but they could probably work out a deal for the ticket revenue. It holds more people, and if both programs ever got good, this would be a game that would sell out. People would line up to see that if both those teams were ranked. It's been a long time since that happened, but it'd be a cool thing. So, you know, maybe it's nostalgic for some of us that, that's an era that's not here anymore, that Maryland's no longer in the ACC and not a powerhouse, and Georgetown is really struggling to get back on its feet after the Patrick Ewing era. Maybe Ed Cooley can turn things around, and they're drawing flies at Capital One Arena. Like when they have a game with 4,000 or 5,000 people there, it's not a good look at all. But a Maryland-Georgetown game should happen every year, and at least for 4 years, we're going to have it. So good for them for working that out. We are in the desert now of the NFL. You know, we're dying of thirst, and any little droplet I want to lap it up. Why did I cough on that? Anyway, so yesterday this was dropped, and it's just funny to listen to. It's not going to happen. As you know, Brandon Aiyuk from the 49ers is going into the last year of his rookie deal. He's going to make $14 million, but he's looking around at the other deals in the league, and the top of the line is now $35 million a year. And he'd like to get a contract in that neighborhood, and he's let his displeasure be known, and he's been hanging out with Jayden Daniels. They're friends. They had played together at Arizona State. And so this was yesterday on ESPN. Ryan Clark, who hosts a podcast called The Pivot, had Brandon Aiyuk come in and do the show. I think they tape it in Los Angeles. And, Jayden Daniels is from that area. He's from California. And so he's been hanging around with Aiyuk. And listen, is explained here that they bring in Aiyuk to do the podcast with Ryan Clark, and he brings along his buddy, Jayden Daniels. Now, this is not Jayden Daniels going with Aiyuk to talk to the 49ers about his deal, but it's showing up at ESPN in Los Angeles to talk to Ryan Clark. So this was Clark, and he had a kind of funny back and forth with Adam Schefter about this yesterday with Laura Rutledge anchoring the coverage on ESPN.
They're actually meeting with the San Francisco 49ers today. He and his representation, Ryan Williams of Athletes First, and Brandon Aiyuk told us that he wanted to set this meeting up himself. And when he was sitting with the Pivot, he said that he's taking these negotiations personal, that the way that they have negotiated with him, the way that they have told him why he's worth what he's worth, it has touched him. It has affected him. He says he wants to be in San Francisco first, but is comfortable playing elsewhere if that's something that the San Francisco 49ers are willing to do via trade. And I will tell you this, when he sat with us, he did not walk into the room alone. First, it was Brandon Aiyuk. Second, it was Jayden Daniels. I'm not a tea leaf reader, but the way that sounds is that Brandon Aiyuk wouldn't mind playing in Washington.
Well, listen, he played with Jayden Daniels. I'm sure the two would love to get together. There were some conversations at one point between the 49ers and the Commanders. The Commanders were interested, but they decided not to do that deal. And so the 49ers didn't want to move on from Brandon Aiyuk anyway. And I know he spoke with Ryan Clark, RC there, but the fact of the matter is, despite the fact that he said the 49ers don't want him back anymore, that's just not true. They absolutely do want him back. And according to RC, they are meeting today. That meeting will involve the 49ers general manager, John Lynch, the head coach, Kyle Shanahan. They'll be meeting to have a nice discussion here before training camp is scheduled to kick off next month. We'll see what comes out of that meeting later today between all those sides. RC will bring us the latest on SportsCenter later, on NFL Live tomorrow.
I'm done
sure
now, Shefty.
we'll be waiting with bated breath. Yep. Hey. And then next week, Laura, just so you know, Laura, I'm hosting, or I want to host, a episode of The Pivot next week after Ryan gets done delivering.
Ryan, can we get that done?
I'd like to see that.
Adam Schefter on The Pivot. He's going to guest
I would love
host The Pivot.
Shefty on The Pivot. He can't host it, though. He can't host it. He already has his own podcast.
Yeah, he does have his own podcast. And it's nice to think about Brandon Aiyuk coming here. It's not going to happen. 49ers are not going to allow that to happen. They'll get him back. And even if they have to franchise him next year, they're going to do it. I mean, that's a top-line receiver for a team that has designs on getting back to the Super Bowl. This is not a Super Bowl team here, even with Brandon Aiyuk, and what they'd have to give up to get him. No, it's just not the way they've done business. And, you do have the connection here with Adam Peters having come from San Francisco, so that, they know each other and, know who to talk to. But, no, and I don't think that's going to be the best thing either for a rookie quarterback, that you got his old buddy from college saying, hey, I'm open. And you're paying Terry McLaurin what you're paying, and you have some other receivers who you hope to resuscitate, and maybe it does not make sense for either team for this to happen. And I think Schefter's 100% right that he's going to wind up. They do want him there. They do want him in San Francisco. So. Yesterday, a podcast was released by John Keim, who does it on a regular basis, once a week or once every couple of weeks. And he had on Ryan Porter, who I'd never heard of. I'm sure you've never heard of him, but he is a quarterback guru who played some college football and was hired by Jayden Daniels' dad when Jayden was like 10 or 11 years old. Yeah, so he's been working with him for a long, long time, and became his quarterback's coach in high school, and they still work together. And I think what you want to hear about a young quarterback is that he is going to put in the time and the study and attention to detail. And listening to this, I'm going to play the highlights of the conversation. Listening to this, the father has realistic expectations, which you didn't have with RG3, who said once, show me a running quarterback, I'll show you a loser. He wanted to snap his fingers and make him into Aaron Rodgers, which was not going to happen. And this is a father and a son working together with this quarterback's coach who has a great understanding of the work it takes to be able to become an elite quarterback. So this, again, Ryan Porter is his name, on with John Keim on his podcast, explaining that Jayden Daniels is not just a great quarterback talent, he's what you have to be in this day and age, a football nerd.
Jayden never turns down an opportunity to get better. Like, Jayden kind of nerds out with this football thing. So in high school, obviously, we had a very consistent routine. And then as a kid, his dad would bring it to me 2 to 3 times a week. And then we kept that pretty consistent. Then obviously I became his quarterback coach at his high school team. I was with him 7 days a week. So Jayden is very routine based, very, very routine based. Obviously things are a little bit different now with him being, in the DMV area. And with him being at LSU, Jayden would come back when he'd get free time in California. When he was at Arizona State, I went up there a couple times and we'd go in the bubble and we'd work and stuff like that. But as often as Jayden could come back and get work, he would.
Yeah. Now, football nerd is what gets the headline here. And that's what you want to hear. Again, I make the comparison to RG3 because I think it's fair. They were both Heisman Trophy winners, both of them number 2 picks of the draft, both bringing high hopes to the franchise that finally they can have the franchise quarterback, which RG3 was for a year, and then it fell apart. And part of it was he didn't know the playbook as well as he should. You remember this when Jay Gruden came in, and Gruden was brought in to resuscitate the whole thing after it fell apart in year 2 under Mike Shanahan. They fired Shanahan after a 4-win season. Jay Gruden comes in, and RG3 decides that he's going to light up his team because he didn't perform well. And he says, when Peyton Manning doesn't play well, it's because the guys around him don't play well. When Tom Brady doesn't play well, it's because the guys around him don't play well. And Jay Gruden said, hey, this guy doesn't even know when to make a 5-step drop and a 7-step drop. Basically saying he doesn't know the playbook. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know the study part. Yeah, he's in great shape. So this is Ryan Porter explaining to what extent he is a football nerd and to what extent he will go to do anything possible to become that elite level quarterback.
Just constantly always watching film, finding new ways. If there's a new technology out that can give him an opportunity to be better, throwing motion, footwork, right? Like I was just at LSU this past weekend, and they have, Jack Marucci up there, who's kind of like their Bill Nye the Science guy. And we spent some time together this weekend, and they were going over their virtual reality thing that they have with Jayden, and how what a big advantage that was for them, for Jayden, because he used that quite a bit. And it was the VR goggles and had the wand and stuff like that. So spent time this weekend with Jack and with Joe Sloan, the offensive coordinator, and they were breaking down like how Jayden used it, right? And what he did, his approach was with that day in and day out to understand protection, to understand his progressions, full field read progressions, game plans, installs, daily, weekly installs and stuff like that. And how now, as far as what I've been informed, is that the Commanders actually purchased that software and they're using it. Yeah. So, and he credits that to a big part of his success, especially these last couple of years at LSU.
It's funny because I talked to Jack a month or so ago, and when you introduce that technology to make it work, you better make sure you have the right person using it, because not every person. And so I think he would have been a perfect one to kind of be the test guy for that, don't you think?
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, absolutely, I agree.
And what else, in terms of football nerd, you talk about plays and watching film, how often would he watch film? What kind of things would he point out watching film that maybe was a little bit more than some other guys you've worked with?
Well, we've always instilled in him at a very young age that the money's in the small details of things. So if he'll take a rep and we're just going over just basic in his transition in his 4-5 or his 2-3. And then we'll film it. He'll come back and he's just one rep. I mean, he's replaying that rep over and over and over again, checking, okay, it was his elbow up, right? What his offhand looks like. Is he front foot heavy? Is he back foot loaded? You know what I mean? Every single rep, he approaches it like it's the last play of the Super Bowl, right? Like, what could I have done to get better on that? Like he takes it serious. But again, I credit his dad, right, for his approach to the game and how proactive he is in his preparation for the game. His dad has instilled this into him at a very, 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 very young age, helping him understand you have a small window for success in football. And once it's gone, it's gone. So don't ever turn down an opportunity to get better, whether it's you're out there throwing in the park, whether you're watching film, whether you're, watching practice, whatever it is, like take full advantage of every single opportunity.
More from Ryan Porter. This is the quarterback's coach for Jayden Daniels since he was 10 years old, and the working relationship that he has both with Jayden and the dad. I think the dad is an important part of this picture here because the dad, while he's not the great Santini here, he's explaining to Jayden Daniels, it's great to be in shape. It's great to be able to run like you can and all that. But the mental part of the game, the part of understanding how to play the position is so important, and picking it up quickly is important because we're looking at quarterbacks who are drafted high and are now on their third team and on their way out of the league. And he doesn't have to look far because, Marcus Mariota, while he still may have some viable starts left in him as a quarterback, his days as a starting quarterback are pretty much behind him. And he was also a Heisman Trophy winner and the second pick of the draft. And that's a message that John Keim says is delivered. John Keim asked Porter about and says is delivered on a regular basis.
All the time. Yeah. It was instilled into you're only as good as your last performance. So, the success that you're having, you may go out in the game and throw for, 390 yards and 5 touchdowns. And then you may go out the very next game and have some, not have some success. So, you have to stay humble. You know that his dad would always talk about how many first-round draft picks now are on their third team already. That this game is very unforgiving, and they can wash you out really, really quick. And so you have to always be on top of your craft, no matter what.
And he also went on to say that the dad at one point said, I really don't want you to play quarterback. And Jayden pushed back, and he said he wanted to play it. He says, okay, if you're going to play quarterback, then this is what you have to do, and this is how hard you have to work to get to where you need to go. I thought that was very, very good. Now, this is the last part from Ryan Porter, and I guess it's a question that is asked of everybody who reaches this level. But, when did they know? When did they know? Because this, again, Porter's been working with him since he was 10 years old. It wasn't like his dad said, hey, this is a future Heisman Trophy winner and a future first-round pick in the NFL. He said, this kid who looks like he's got some potential to play quarterback, I want you to work with him and see what you could develop. And as time went on, again, he started working with him when he was 10, so he gets to be in high school. And this is the point where Porter says they realized, basically like Jaws, we're going to need a bigger boat.
His junior year in high school, his second game, me and his dad were standing on top of the press box probably about an hour before the game. And I asked him, I said, what do you think, realistically, where do you think Jayden is? And he had an okay game, first game of his junior year. And I go, where do you think, where's this going to go? And he goes, and Jay always paints the most humblest picture possible. And he was like, yeah, I think he could play Arizona, Arizona State. And he was like, but, I'm prepared for, Fresno State, Boise State. Realistic. He always is extremely realistic. And Jayden went out there against Hank Bachmeier, and he threw for like 598 yards and like 7 touchdowns. Went crazy. And we kind of looked at each other like, and then he did it again the next game. And the next game, he had like 3 or 4 straight games where he threw for over 550 and like 6 touchdowns. And we were like, oh, yeah. I mean, no knock. Group of 5? Yeah, I don't know. And then all of a sudden, everything just started racking in. And then, like I said, he threw for over 60 touchdown passes that junior season, threw for over 5,100 yards, and then rushed for over 1,200 yards. And then he did again the senior year. That's when I think we all knew, like, yeah, this is different. This is generational. Like you don't see this much. This, I doubt we'll ever see this again, in 10, 15 years. That's when we knew that it was that game, the Marietta Valley game. And then he did it, back to back to back to back to back games after that.
That's Ryan Porter, the quarterback's coach for Jayden Daniels for at least the last decade or more. And what he's seeing, and again, I love the realistic expectations of the dad. We're not going to have the dad issue that we had with Robert Griffin III. Show me a running quarterback, I'll show you a loser. The whole deal, all that mishigas. So I would say, based on that conversation, I know there's a lot that we have to see. We have to see how he performs in pads, and we have to see how he performs during the exhibition games in the regular season. But all signs pointing to a much smoother ride with this number 2 pick overall and former Heisman Trophy winner than the last one in 2012. All right, I am going to the Orioles game tonight, so I'm going to watch that. I'm looking forward to that. I haven't been to a baseball game this year, I don't think. And no, I have not. And so I will have full details on that. We do Orioles preview every Wednesday, so I will talk about my experience at Camden Yards tomorrow. Tony's doing a Tuesday show, so we got Tony coming up next, and I will see you back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.